The story of George Armstrong Custer's final hours at the Battle of the Little Bighorn has long been told as a crushing defeat for the 7th U.S. Cavalry. Yet beneath that familiar version lies a deeper, more complex reality, one shaped not only by soldiers' accounts, but also by the words of those who fought on the other side. In this documentary, we'll uncover the often overlooked voices of Cheyenne and Sioux warriors, whose firsthand testimonies offer a strikingly different vision of what truly happened on that fateful June day in 1876. As historian William A. Graham once observed, native accounts of the battle are filled with contradictions, but within those inconsistencies lie invaluable clues to the true flow of events. For too long, cultural prejudice and mistranslation have obscured their meaning. In exploring these indigenous narratives, we'll see how they challenge the long-accepted version of Custer's last stand, transforming it from a tale of hopeless defeat into one of determined defense and resistance. Through their eyes, themes of courage, endurance, and cultural survival come alive, echoes of a people fighting for their land, their families, and their way of life. Prepare to reconsider everything you thought you knew about Custer's downfall as we illuminate the hidden truths preserved through Cheyenne and Sioux oral history. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our growing community of history enthusiasts. When retired Army Colonel and historian William A. Graham published The Custer Myth in 1953, compiling native recollections of the battle, he offered a word of caution. Discrepancies and conflicts abound in these Indian narratives. Readers must grapple with them, as scholars have, and draw their own conclusions. His words reflected a common sentiment of the era that indigenous voices were too unreliable for serious scholarship. Yet that skepticism was deeply rooted in cultural bias rather than in fact. Despite his reservations, Graham's work remains one of the richest collections of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, Crow, and Arikara testimony ever assembled. The Crow and Arikara scouts who served alongside the U.S. Army provided vital insights into Major Reno's movements, offering clarity to parts of the battle long missing from official reports. Their words helped map Custer's ill-fated maneuver toward the Little Bighorn River, far from Reno's embattled position. While Crow and Arikara accounts largely aligned with known military records, the stories of Sioux and Cheyenne participants opened a rarer window, one into Custer's final moments, where no white survivor remained. For more than a century, public fascination with his death has kept Little Bighorn alive in memory, elevating it beyond hundreds of other frontier clashes. The symbolism endures, the U.S. cavalry's most stunning defeat and the native nation's brief but powerful triumph. From the very start, it was clear that native accounts could reveal much about Custer's failure. But the earliest testimonies, gathered in 1876 to 77 from surrendering warriors, suffered from poor translations, biased interviewers, and sensationalized retellings. What emerged were fragmented, sometimes contradictory stories, emotional but chaotic, adding layers of mystery instead of clarity. Later recollections, including those from Sitting Bull's followers after their 1881 return from Canada, faced the same problems. Fear of reprisal and cultural misunderstandings clouded their words, and many historians simply dismissed them as too inconsistent to trust. By the time Graham revisited them in the 1950s, they were treated more as curiosities than credible evidence. Yet in the early 20th century, a change began. Researchers like Eli S, Walter M. Camp, and George Bird Grinnell approached indigenous storytellers with new respect and discipline. Between the 1890s and 1920s, they recorded veterans' recollections in remarkable detail. Critics argue that time dulled their accuracy, but distance from the event often allowed survivors to speak freely, no longer constrained by fear. From the 1920s through the 1950s, scholars such as Thomas B. Marquette and Eleanor H. Hinman added even more firsthand voices, widening the historical scope to include the broader indigenous struggle beyond Little Bighorn. As decades passed, memory faded, and secondhand stories replaced direct testimony. But archaeology would soon lend those old words fresh credibility. In the 1980s and 1990s, battlefield excavations confirmed key elements of native oral histories, matching descriptions of clashes at Medicine Tail Coulee, Calhoun Hill, and the final desperate retreat toward the river. These discoveries validated what many had dismissed as myth. Richard Hardorff's collection of 14 Lakota and Cheyenne narratives, complete with translator notes and biographical context, became a milestone in Little Bighorn scholarship. His work not only deepened our understanding of the fight, but also highlighted the enduring truth that indigenous voices are essential to any honest telling of the story. These are the voices that defy silence, voices that counter the myth of Custer's last stand. Few moments in U.S. history have so gripped the imagination as the Battle of the Little Bighorn. On June 25, 1876, under the blazing summer sun, Custer and 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry were annihilated by Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. News of the disaster shocked a nation in the midst of its centennial celebration, staining its triumphal mood with tragedy. Even now, nearly 150 years later, the battle still resonates. Its fascination lies not just in the scale of the loss, but in the figure at its center, Custer himself. A dashing, polarizing Civil War hero, his life ended in chaos and defeat on the lonely hills of Montana, alongside his 2 brothers, a brother-in-law, and a nephew. The roots of the conflict reach back to 1868, when the Treaty of Fort Laramie granted the Sioux and Cheyenne permanent rights to the Black Hills, as long as the grass grows and the rivers flow. That promise shattered in 1874 with the discovery of gold. Waves of prospectors poured into the sacred lands, while the government's attempts to buy back the territory collapsed under greed and pressure. The Sioux accused the United States of betrayal. Settlers accused the tribes of raids. By December 1875, the Indian Bureau issued an ultimatum. Any bands still roaming off reservation by January 31, 1876, would be declared hostile. When the deadline passed, the Army prepared for war. By spring, a 3-pronged campaign formed. Colonel John Gibbon's Montana column advanced east from Fort Ellis. General Alfred Terry, with Custer's 7th Cavalry, moved west from Fort Lincoln. General George Crook led his troops north from Fort Fetterman. The plan trapped the Sioux and Cheyenne between these converging forces, but the offensive stumbled from the start. In March, Colonel J.J. Reynolds' ill-fated raid on a Cheyenne village failed disastrously. Then on June 17, Crook clashed with Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at the Battle of the Rosebud and withdrew, effectively removing his column from the campaign that left Terry and Gibbon to press on. On June 22, Custer's regiment, some 600 men, including scouts and civilians, rode out ahead to locate the enemy. Instead of waiting for support, Custer pushed forward, confident in his ability to deliver a swift, decisive strike. What followed was one of America's most infamous defeats. Alone and outnumbered, Custer's command encountered a massive native encampment home to thousands of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. Within hours, the 7th Cavalry was destroyed. The Battle of the Little Bighorn endures not just as a military calamity, but as a symbol of pride, of defiance, and of the devastating cost of westward expansion. It confronts us with the broken promises, cultural collisions, and extraordinary resilience of indigenous nations. Modern archaeology and renewed respect for Native testimony have reshaped how we understand the fight. What was once hailed as a heroic last stand now emerges as a complex, multi-sided struggle for survival and sovereignty. The story of Little Bighorn is still being written because history is not only about what happened, but about who gets to tell it. On June 24th, Custer's troops advanced along the Rosebud, camping near present-day Busby, Montana. That night, he set out west through the Wolf Mountains under cover of darkness, hoping to reach the Little Bighorn Valley by dawn. But the rough terrain and slow-moving pack train delayed them, forcing a halt before sunrise. By morning, scouts spotted a vast native village in the valley below. Custer couldn't see it himself, but native lookouts had already seen him. Secrecy was lost. He ordered an immediate advance. By midday, his men crossed the Wolf Mountains and saw dust clouds rising from the distant valley. Following General Terry's orders to block any southern escape, Custer sent Captain Frederick Benteen with 3 companies to sweep the bluffs and attack if necessary. The rest of the regiment divided into 3 battalions. Major Marcus Reno led companies A, M, and G. Captain Miles Keogh commanded companies C, I, and L. Captain George Yates led companies E and F. Company B stayed with the pack train. As Custer followed Reno Creek, the troops came upon an abandoned Indian camp, signs of recent departure still smoldering. Fearing the villagers were escaping, Custer ordered Reno to pursue and engage. But as Reno crossed the river, he realized the truth. The village wasn't fleeing, it was enormous. He quickly dismounted his men into a skirmish line across the valley floor, near the modern town of Garryowen. The fight began. Within minutes, the warriors' sheer numbers overwhelmed the line. Reno's men retreated to the timber, then under intense pressure, fled across the river in chaos. As Custer followed Reno Creek, the troops came upon an abandoned Indian camp, signs of recent departure still smoldering. Fearing the villagers were escaping, Custer ordered Reno to pursue and engage. But as Reno crossed the river, he realized the truth. The village wasn't fleeing, it was enormous, losing dozens. They regrouped on the bluffs, soon joined by Benteen's battalion. From there, they heard faint volleys downstream. Custer's fight had begun. He quickly dismounted his men into a skirmish line across the valley floor, near the modern town of Garryowen. The fight began. Within minutes, the warriors' sheer numbers overwhelmed the line. Reno's men retreated to the timber, then, under intense pressure, fled across the river in chaos, losing dozens. They regrouped on the bluffs, soon joined by Benteen's battalion. From there, they heard faint volleys downstream. Custer's fight had begun. Weir's company pushed forward to a ridge, glimpsing the battle below: dust, gunfire, and swarming riders. But the warriors turned toward them, forcing a retreat to what became Reno Hill there. The soldiers endured 2 days of siege, heat, and terror until General Terry and Colonel Gibbon arrived on June 27. What they found was horror. Custer and his 5 companies were dead, no survivors. The bodies lay in grim clusters, 2 companies on Calhoun Ridge, another in a shallow ravine, and around Custer himself on the hill that now bears his name. The true sequence of the fight remains uncertain. Why did Custer choose his route? Did his men attempt to cross at Medicine Tail Ford? Was Last Stand Hill really the end, or just one of several desperate positions? These questions endure, their answers scattered among relics and bones. Eyewitness testimony from Native participants remains our most vital yet most fragile source. Translation errors, cultural gaps, and interviewer bias warped many accounts. Accuracy depended on 3 fragile links: the speaker's honesty, the translator's skill, and the interviewer's neutrality. Too often, one of those broke. Some accounts were edited for drama, others distorted by fear or misunderstanding. And yet, through their inconsistencies, they preserve invaluable details, snapshots of a fluid, chaotic battlefield seen through the eyes of those who lived it. For Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, battle was both communal and personal, an expression of courage and honor. Each man fought for his own prestige as much as for victory. Their testimonies reflect that individuality, vivid personal fragments rather than full narratives. To outsiders, these seem confusing. To historians seeking linear reports, they appeared unreliable. But in truth, these stories are windows into experience, each one a thread in a tapestry of memory and survival. When interpreted with care, they illuminate truths that conventional records cannot. The gunfire has long faded from the hills of the Little Bighorn, but the echoes remain. Was Custer a reckless fool or a doomed hero? Did the victors foresee the vengeance that would follow? The land still holds its secrets, spent cartridges, shattered bones, and the unmarked graves of those who died unseen. Perhaps we will never fully know what happened in those final frantic minutes. But maybe that's the point. The mystery itself is the monument. What do you think determined the outcome of the battle? Share your theory below, because history's greatest debate is still open.